Hi, I'm a local hippie. And today, in honor of me trying to get back into reading really big books, I'm going to give a few tips on how to read big books. If you're struggling to read big books, if you think big books are intimidating, if you've never picked up a big book has piqued your interest, but you never picked it up because maybe you felt like, how am I going to do this? I've never read a 600, 700, 800, 9,000, what, 900, 1,000 page book. So I'm going to give you a few of the tips that have helped me kind of sort of overcome that fear of really big books. And I think the biggest thing for me, this might be true for a lot of people in the same kind of situation. You work, you go to school, you have other things that you care about, and you do other hobbies in your life. So, the biggest factor I think in why one may not read big books or may stray away from reading big books is because it just will take a lot of time. And none of these tips are going to make it go by faster or um, make it less daunting of a task. But I think these tips will help you approach reading bigger books in such a way where they just feel like books and not like things to be conquered. So, tip number one is pretty straightforward: listen to audiobooks. I have an Audible subscription. I love Audible. I probably always will have an Audible subscription. Even if I'm reading books physically, I really like to have a matching audiobook because for the times in my life where I can't um, physically read, I can't sight read, I can listen to the audiobook. Like, for instance, on my way to work, on my way home from work, on my lunch break, or on my 15-minute breaks, if you're into that. I've done that a few times. Um, or as you're doing your chores, you're doing the laundry, you're doing the dishes, you're folding the laundry, you're whatever you might be doing in your personal life. You might be going for a walk, you might be going to the gym, whatever. You can have it in your ears and you can get a lot more reading done than if you relied solely on sight reading as your means of um, getting your daily page count in. So that leads me to tip number two, which is probably the crux of this video because this trick helped me read one of the first nonfiction books that I not only read but enjoyed thoroughly. Is um, set a set an amount of pages that you want to read per day of that big book. So the way I like to do it is to divide the page count by as many days as you want to spend reading it. So, for instance, with this copy of War and Peace, which I have yet to read yet, which I have yet to read, I have all of these tabs up here. I don't know if you can see that, but I have all of these tabs, right? Each one of these tabs is a daily goal. And when I'm done with that daily goal, I can take the tab out and either continue to read up to the next tab, which is another daily goal, or I could just close the book for the day. And this is really helpful because it's kind of like, because it's not that much. So let's say, like what I'm doing currently with the book that I am going to start reading here soon, Middlemarch by George Eliot. I've just began sectioning off the page count, which is about 30 pages per day. I want to read this book Middlemarch in 31 days, so a month. And um, I divided 31 days, or I divided 839-ish pages, which is how many are in this book, by 31, which gave me about 27-ish pages, but I just rounded it up because it'll take a day or so off, I think, of the reading time. And then also just because, I don't know, I like 30 a little bit better than 27. So every day, you can commit to reading 30 pages instead of scrambling and trying to read 100 pages, or 50, 60, 70 super high numbers. It might take you 45 minutes to read 30, and then you're done for the day. You know what I'm saying? And you can break it down even more. You don't have to read the book in a month. You could do 90 days if you want to read a really, really big book like a Count of Monte Cristo. You can read that in 90 days. You could read it in 120 days. Whatever the goal is for you, you could read it in 4 weeks. But the point is to just divide the page count of the book by however many days you want to spend reading it. And I think that makes it more fun, especially for me, because I'm like super competitive. I'm like, okay, I set this goal, so I gotta smash it. And it helps because it's not a super big goal. I think this method helps when you give yourself a longer period of time to read the book, because then it's less pages. The longer you go, the less pages you have to read daily. And it feels really good because you're doing something that you said you would. So that's one tip, is to just divide the book. Um, by the amount of days that you want to read it. And you'll find that you're not only excited to read your pages for the day, but you might find yourself reading multiple days in one. So you might end up reading 100 pages over 30, and then there you go. You just bought yourself 2, 3 more days um, of leeway for the times where you maybe may not feel like reading your 30 pages, so you can do that without losing your momentum, basically, or falling behind. Another tip is kind of in the same vein as the last one, is if it's a really big book, again, like War and Peace. Usually with books that are this large, there are volumes, because, and a lot of that with classics specifically is because the books were serialized, so they weren't released in these big huge volumes when the authors wrote them. They were wrote as, in the same kind of way a TV show is written. So every week you get an episode, and every month that the episodes that you got per week ended up being a volume. And so you can break really big books down into volumes. I did that here as well because, I mean, this book is massive. So I ended up um not only sectioning off days, but sectioning off volumes to help me just kind of see what I have ahead of me, how long I have left in volume one until I get to volume two. And that's really helpful. Just seeing my progress is really, really helpful, I find, with these big books, because otherwise you can kind of begin to feel a little lost in the sauce as to, like, where you are, and you might end up having big book fatigue because you just don't feel like you're making it anywhere. But with these two tips, with the dividing the page count by the number of days that you want to read it, and having the tabs, you always have something urging you on, which is to take out that next tab. And it's small, but it's like a little dopamine hit, and it's really nice. And the same thing with the volumes, because you get through volume one, you're like, yeah, I've read 300 pages of this book. Yay, let's read 300 more, basically. So that's that one. Section the book off by volume, with tabs that you can see. And then, let's see. Another tip I would say, if you're not super into doing all the tabbing and stuff, and if you're a little bit more leisurely about your reading and you don't care about making deadlines, I would say just like make very small goals, like reading for 10 minutes a day. Like maybe if it's easier for you to read the only time you have for free is before you go to bed at night. Maybe you want to kick your phone habit or whatever. I know I've been there. You can swap your phone time for reading your book for 10 minutes, 10, 15, 20 minutes, however long you've got as you wind down for bed. That could be very helpful, because even if you're not reading that much, by the time the end of the year comes, you'd be surprised how many books you can knock out just by reading 10 pages per day. If you're reading a really, really huge book like this, I mean, it might actually end up taking you about a year or so to read the whole thing. But I mean, by the end of that year, you've read Leo Tolstoy's magnum opus. So, like, that's that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. I'm just saying that's kind of cool. So yeah, just like if you're really leisurely about it, you read it. Um, and that's your goal, is to read for 10 minutes, just to make it really simple before you go to bed every night. And sometimes you might find yourself being like, oh, you know, at the end of this 10 minutes, oh, I haven't finished the chapter yet. I want to read into the end of the chapter. And you end up wanting to read more. Some nights you'll read less, some nights you'll read more. But at the end of the day, you're still reading. And I wouldn't say not to read every day, because I do read every day, or I do a lot of audiobook listening every single day. Um, and you don't have to do that, but if you did want to, that's an option. It doesn't always have to be read the most. It's not a competition. You can just be free. You know what I'm saying? Be free. That's how that I think, because I think that's how you keep your love of reading intact, is if you don't make it a job, if you don't make it a competition, if you don't make it this big thing where you have to read like X amount of books per year. Because when you get caught up in that, at least from my experience, getting caught up in that can really fatigue you, you know? And like, in the end, what are you doing it for? Are you doing it so that you will have read X amount of books by the end of the year? What does that really give you? When, especially if we're reading to learn things, we're reading to be to experience um, different things outside of our everyday life. If we're reading for enjoyment, if we're reading for entertainment, like that go, 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 hustle, hustle, hustle mentality is just like the death of all of that. It's the death of leisure. It's the death of enjoyment. It's the death of ease, and I feel like there should be some of that in reading. You should enjoy it, if especially if you have it as a hobby, you should enjoy it. You should have fun with it. Um, so that's those are pretty much all of my tips on reading bigger books. It's just, I think, breaking them down and making a large goal into smaller goals that add up to the big one. And it's like daily you reach these goals, and then all of them are leading you towards the end of this book, which it's not about. It shouldn't be about getting to the end of the book. It should be about enjoying the book. I still have a little bit of that mindset of like trying to read as much as I possibly can in the shortest amount of time. But what I found is that, sometimes it, it's not really beneficial to you as a reader to do that. And especially with like classics and things like that, because there's so much to learn from them. They're so rich that sometimes you should probably take your time. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I think those are my tips for reading big books, and or getting acclimated with big books, because they're not the scary monsters that I know, like even I started out thinking that they were. I know that they take a lot of time, but if you just ask yourself, what's the rush? You'll probably come to a place where you're like, I really want to read this book, so I'm gonna read it, no matter how long it takes me. And then I guess one last final tip is just giving the book the time it needs. If you, if you set a particular goal for reading a book, for instance, when I read Crime and Punishment last year, I had set out to read two other large books with it. I set out to read, I believe it was um Tower of Dawn by Sarah J. Maas and Game of Thrones by George R. R. Martin. And if you are familiar with either of those books, they are not small. They're not small. Okay? They're not small. And if you're familiar with Crime and Punishment, neither is she. She is thick. Okay? And also dense. So like I I had to put Game of Thrones and Tower of Dawn away. And it wasn't even Game of Thrones. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It wasn't Game of Thrones. It was Clash of Kings, the second book in the Game of Thrones or the Song of Fire and Ice series. I had to put it away. I had to, and I haven't picked it back up since. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I did finish Tower of Dawn though, but I did not finish Clash of Kings. Another story for another time. But I put those aside because I wanted to give time to Crime and Punishment because I felt it deserved my full attention and um my full bandwidth if if you know what I mean. I thought it deserved my full bandwidth and I gave it to it and I felt so fulfilled at the end of that month because I savored that book. I went on a journey with that book. And I think that's a tip in and of itself. It's just learning to give books the time and the attention that they deserve, especially when they're large. Um, so yeah, those are my tips for reading really, really big books. I guess I'll give one more, an honorable mention of just reading smaller books with them, especially if you're reading classics. I'm talking a lot about classics in this video, but you know, if you are reading classics, you know, and you're trying to read big classics, I would say tandem read small books with it. So, like, whenever you take a break from the big book, you just get a little short story, you get a little romance, you get a little this, you get a little that. You know your taste. So, you read whatever you like. You read a little manga here and there, whatever you like that is going to kind of refresh you while getting through a really, really big work. You'd be surprised how much reading something smaller in tandem will motivate you to continue reading the bigger work that you had set out to read. So, yeah, those are my tips for reading big books. Coming from someone who is trying to get back into reading the way I once did, and am starting that with reading a pretty decent sized novel. So, yeah. I hope you have a good day. I hope you have a good evening. And most importantly, I hope you read a good book. And I'll see you when I see you. Bye.